All right, welcome back, family. Come on in. So today we have Shifu Loretta, and I always want to mess up your last name, so I'm not going to actually use your last name. I'll let you pronounce it for us later. But anyway, Shifu Loretta is one of the Tai Chi women in the world that I have met, and not very many. And I tell you what, she just stood out to me in such a phenomenal way when I met her. And once I started to learn more about her and what she had done and what she's still doing and what she could offer, it was like, we got to get together on our little talk show and have her come on here and just show people how Tai Chi is not just a martial art, not that it's not a great thing as a martial art, but that there's so much more to it. And with her being so directly tied, very close to I say the origin of the culture, because she was the assistant of a very well-known Tai Chi master, and she'll tell you about that as well. She got some gems that she experienced that some of us may not have a clue in regards to that. So here we have it today, Shifu Loretta. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester. Thank you, Shifa Lester. So good to see you. So good to see everyone. And it's just so wonderful that, we all looked at like online and how that was hard on Tai Chi, but in some ways it's wonderful that it can just reunite us like this and just get the word out. It's wonderful.
That's very true. So we're here at CCH 360. We're on a mission to spread the arts, the various aspects of the arts. And it's myself here as well as Dan Tracy and also Pam Dye. The three of us work together, and we've been having people such as yourself and other guests as well come on and just share a little bit about one of the things I wanted to ask you is what drew your interest originally? Because I know it changes over time, and you've been at it for a while. But what initially got you drawn into such a, I say, kind of mystical art form?
Well, I think that's actually rooted in my childhood. Um, hmm. When I was a kid, I was very curious and I was very interested in, it's weird. I think really, well, my aunt is Japanese. My family are immigrants from Germany, but my aunt is immigrant from Japan. And she kind of always got me interested a little bit more about that Eastern thought and Eastern culture. So I think that seed was always planted at a young age. And then I did things like I was supposed to do ballet. I had a very classical upbringing. I was supposed to do ballet. I was supposed to, learn how to play the flute and piano and all these things. If I had private lessons, I had to do very well in school, all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to really learn martial arts. I was intrigued by it. I liked that you could do something with it. It's not just pretty or, of course it is, but I liked that it was practical.
Mm.
And I liked that it had some kind of philosophy behind it. So even at a young age, I was kind of intrigued by it, but I wasn't allowed to do it because, girls are not supposed to do things like karate and all that kind of thing in a very traditional family upbringing, very sort of strict European upbringing. And then I just kept getting interested in it. And then when I finally went to college, I studied jujitsu, and it was just because I happened to see that there was a fair that they were doing, and they were demonstrating the different clubs, and I thought, oh, it's Japanese, that's interesting, and they have supposedly a traditional lineage, and I was very fascinated with that, so I joined that, but I sustained a knee injury,
Mm.
and at that time we didn't have really good things like MRI technology. We didn't have a lot of that back then. This was in the early 90s, let's just say, maybe early 90s. We didn't even have cell phones, okay? So the doctor basically told me to just stay off of it and not do anything for about 6 months. And that just made me stir crazy because I wanted to do something physical and I wanted to do and I, to let off steam and take care of myself and deal with stress from college and all that. And I just didn't like it. And I heard of Tai Chi. Back then, Tai Chi was so obscure. Even in a big college, I went to Rutgers. Even in a big college, it was very obscure still back then. And I heard about it's this martial art, but it's also a healing art. And I was like, this really intrigued me. And it intrigued me. I was studying Zen Buddhism at the time. I belonged to a group that was doing meditation. And I just, I don't know, this whole thing of the Taoism just intrigued me. And, so then, long story short, I found somebody who taught Tai Chi. And then I tried a little bit of that and so on and so forth. And I went back home for the summer. That summer I went back home. Usually I would stay and I would work at the university and rent an apartment. But I went back home to Vernon, New Jersey, and I thought, oh, I really want to do something. Maybe I'll start karate now, or something. And I went in my phone book, my parents' phone book, and I was looking under martial arts schools. And in the tiniest little font, it said Tai Chi Farm.
Mm.
And I knew this place on Route 94, right over the border past Vernon, New Jersey, where I lived. I knew it existed, but I always thought it was like a hippie farm or like where they just grew fruit or something.
Right.
I didn't know anything about it. And I thought, really, they teach? And so I called up and some volunteer answered the phone and yes, and so on and so forth. And that's how I found my teacher who's, and he's written books and he's doing all this stuff and he's teaching these classes. And it just, and that's how it all started.
Right. So how do you pronounce your teacher's name again?
Jou Tsung Hwa.
Right. And he wrote
Yeah.
the Tao of Tai Chi, right?
Sorry?
I think one of his books is the Tao of Tai Chi.
Yes, the Tao of Tai Chi Chuan. Yes, the Tao of
Right.
Tai Chi Chuan, Tao of meditation, Tao of I Ching. Yeah. And from doing that Tai Chi, that healed my knee. When I went to grad school, I was diagnosed with very bad colitis, ulcerative colitis, they thought it was Crohn's disease, and I was extremely sick. And that's because I started slacking on my practice and I was just, like eating McDonald's and
Mm.
cereal. That's what I lived off of. And I had to cut all that out, and I went back to my Tai Chi and my teacher showed me some self massage and Qigong and all that, and it cured it. I was
Mm.
blown away by the healing ability of it too, and it's like two sides of the same coin. The knowledge that you need for hurting an opponent, for rendering them unable to hurt you. On the flip side of that, you use that same knowledge, you can use it for healing. It's how you apply it to yourself or someone else.
So currently, what is your focus now dealing with the arts? What's your focus? Like, do you have like a long term goal that you're working on, a plan or anything like that?
But I have shifted all my school online, whereas before it was on person, and that's with the whole COVID thing and all that, everybody went online, and my students actually got to like it, and I became, I think, pretty proficient at teaching online because it's different than teaching in person, but I have an
Yeah.
ergonomics background. That was my research background, and I actually could apply it to Tai Chi. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand it, get them together. So I want to create more of an open forum for that. That's one of my goals, and to really get that back. I'm probably going to do the Tai Chi Gala again, but I'm not sure. So those are some of my goals. I'm going to write another book probably. We'll see.
So one more question just to piggyback off of your classes online. So your online classes, are you focused on pre-recorded or are you doing live sessions?
I have both. I
Oh,
have the pre-recorded where they can also contact me with questions. That's my very basic level. And then I have my students that I carried over from when I taught in New Jersey.
gotcha.
Yeah, and so that's the one I also want to expand, and that takes a little sort of engineering on how to make that work because of different time zones and when, do people come in at different times, but then this person's advanced and this person's beginner. So, that's something I'm really kind of working on right now.
Is who do you go to now for your answers?
That's a great question. I do a lot of what my teacher did. So I took a lot of notes when I studied with him, and luckily I asked him quite a few questions, and I'm so glad I did. If I have questions now, a lot of it I try to research on my own because that's what he did. And that's what Shan Sun Fung did, the legendary founder of the Tai Chi systems. And I will also look at what do other people do in related arts. So I will also look at the other Neijia arts like Xing Yi Chuan and Baguazhang and those
Hmm.
arts. And I kind of like, what are they doing that's similar? Because I'm really good at seeing patterns, and that's one thing that, I can use to help me get an answer. And then I'll sometimes go online. Um, and I'm also very blessed and lucky that I got to study with Dr. Painter, for example, Bagua expert from Texas, when he used to piggyback his event on the end of the Tai Chi Gala, the Chanson Film Festival that my teacher started. And
Hmm.
so I was really lucky. And because his stuff really works, and especially for martial arts, and he will always answer your questions. So, I try to find people like that. I look at what they do. I watch. I do think of actual physics and anatomy when I do things, and then I relate it back sometimes to Chinese medicine or Chinese thought, energy work, things like that. Because I believe that there's no division between Western and Eastern thought. There's no division between physics and metaphysics. I think that they are at other ends of the pole, but there's a point where they intersect. And so I try to really look at that when and it depends on the question too. Is it a very physical thing? Is it a technique thing? Is it a historical thing? Is it a Chinese energy thing? Is it an acupressure thing? I try to look at all those things, and then that's how I come to my answer. So it's usually a big research project.
You're a certified massage therapist, and I know that relates directly, but in your words, how does that relate to your Tai Chi and your growth?
Oh yeah. Um, that was one thing I did. Was I was also interested in therapeutic massage. And it's because it's very hands-on and it's very much into anatomy and physiology, but it's also looks at the energetic side. And it allowed me to understand a lot about the human body while also helping people. You can really understand how the body is put together if you study anatomy and you do deep tissue work, for example. You can also understand how to really find energy acupoints when you have to do it on someone else, do it on yourself and do it on
Mhm.
someone else. And you can see their reaction to it. It's really interesting. So it gives you such a fertile groundwork. So whatever seeds you're trying to plant, you've got this really good fertile groundwork to understand it from a very hands-on point of view. But I call it the Hannibal Lecter principle. He was what? He was a surgeon, right? He was a psychiatrist, but he was a doctor, and he also had this background of anatomy and physiology because you go to med school, you got to dissect the body, right? Um, and so, but he was evil, right? He used his knowledge not to help people, but to harm. So it's like what I just said before, and I'm going to reiterate it. I call it the Hannibal Lecter principle. If you know very well how to heal, like if you understand, for example, I don't go by when I massage someone, don't go to underneath the scalene area too far over here because you're going to hit the brachial plexus. And then, that could, if you're doing deep tissue work, that could paralyze their arm, right? That's the healing. And knowing that if they have an impingement there, that could be why they're feeling something that, thoracic outlet syndrome, it feels like carpal tunnel, but it's not. Now, that same knowledge, though, if I'm fighting, and I have a stick or something like a kubotan or a knife,
Mhm.
I know right away where to put it on someone to make sure they can't hurt me, right? As self-defense. So it's like this, everything you learn, same thing with DMAC, a the poison points, right? If you understand, like you come in there with force and you go against the flow of meridian and you do it at this certain aggressive way, well, that point you also know how to locate now for healing, right? That a lot of the Chinese masters and systems of either healing and martial arts, that's why I think they were sometimes kept very secret, even the healing systems, because sometimes people, they're like, oh, well, that's old bourgeois Chinese thinking. Well, because if you really understand the body and all these delicate things and stuff and for healing, if you're not a very nice person, or if you have to use it in a martial situation and you are a nice person, you can use it for hurting. See? So that's what that background really gave me. And I was just amazed at how it's really the yin and the yang. It's two sides of the same coin. So that's why I really benefited greatly from learning hands-on healing work. And it really helps
Mhm.
your understanding of martial work as well.
If you, looking back in your career, would you do anything different?
Yeah, I think so. As far as career, marketing and business, like if you're going to make a career out of this, you have to deal with those evils. You have to, and you can't treat it like it's bad. You have to understand it's part of life. You can't treat it like it's like this thing in my business and nobody really wants to do it, but you have to reframe your thinking about that, because that's the only way really people can find you and understand that the art you do has worth. So you don't even have to look at it like, oh, I'm promoting myself and pushing myself. What you're doing is actually you're promoting Tai Chi or Qigong or whatever. And that's important because that's all natural and it's very empowering. So that was the one thing I wish I had invested more time and energy into when I was younger. But I think that we need to understand that if we're going to do this as a career, we really need to take that into account.